witches, wizards, fools and all the rest. Who can tell what's hidden away inside the story chest? Tales and yarns and fables, ballads, songs and jests. So join us as we rummage in the magic story chest.
Welcome to TCTV Story Chest. This is part 1 of the Saga of Beowulf. Beowulf is an extremely old story. It's one of the earliest things written down in Old English that isn't a religious text. It's a saga and was originally written in the form of a poem. Our telling isn't going to be a poem. It's going to be a told story. Beowulf is a story set in Geatland, which is now modern-day Gotland in Sweden. It's a story that was probably shared by the Anglo Saxons and the Norse peoples alike. Originally, I'm sure it was a story that was told rather than read, a story told around fires in mead halls on cold winter nights. A story about a great hero and about creatures of nightmare. Our story starts in Hrefnsholt, the mead hall of King Hygelac, ruler of the Geats, in the middle of the deepest winter in the Northlands. King Hygelac's warriors feast with their king, celebrating their successes, the raids on the Danes and the Wolfingas, the things they have stolen, the slaves they have taken. They listen to stories, they sing songs. Hrefnsholt is a place of warmth and laughter and happiness during the cold winter. They remember their fallen comrades, their shoulder-to-shoulder men. Sat at one table, near the king, is his nephew, Beowulf. Larger than any other warrior in the hall, as tall as a bear and as strong as 20 men. He's the king's favourite, a powerful warrior who always returns from raids with loot and treasure aplenty. It's dark and cold in the Northlands, and the daylight is very short. There is not much to do. Sharpen weapons, mend armour maybe, and then spend time planning for next year's raiding season. On one of these dark nights, with the snow piled up outside and the wind blowing against the roof of the hall, the warriors were lost in tales of heroes and songs of the gods. The king was enjoying himself, drinking, feasting with his warriors, when the evening was disrupted by the door suddenly blowing open at the end of the hall, and caked in snow and ice there stood a lone, cloaked traveller. The king bellowed for his horsemen to close the door and to have the traveller make his way up to see him. The traveller walked between the tables. Every man went quiet and turned and looked at him. The traveller steamed as the ice and snow on his cloak melted in the warmth of the hall. His snow-covered beard dripped on the floor. He sat at the table near the king, although the king's guards kept a close eye on him. He was given food and ale, and when the colour had come back to his cheeks and he was warm enough, he stood in front of the king. King Hygelac said to him, "What brings you here in the middle of the winter, in such weather? What is so important that you would risk death crossing the sea in storm and blizzard?" And the messenger looked at the king. "Your Majesty, I've been sent here by King Hrothgar of the Danes." There was a murmur around the hall. Hrothgar was Hygelac's greatest enemy. Why would he send a messenger at this time of the year all the way to Geatland? Does he send a challenge? Does he claim some great wrong has been done unto him? He does, my lord, but not by you. He asks for aid. He seeks brave warriors who might come and help him in an hour of need. The king stared down at the messenger. Why would I want to help King Hrothgar of the Danes? What has he done for me, apart from raided my shores, stolen my cattle, tried to take my people as his slaves? King Hrothgar, my lord, sends a message to all of the tribes of the north to see if there is someone brave enough, stout enough, strong enough to come into Denmark and rid him of a terrible creature of nightmare. The messenger spoke of Hrothgar and a hall that he had built. Hrothgar's mead hall was known across the Northlands. It was called Heorot, and the Danes boasted it was the greatest and finest building anywhere ever to be built, greater even than Hrefnsholt. When this great hall had been built, the king summoned his finest warriors and all those of importance from around his land to come and feast there, and they thought it was a wondrous thing. But not all thought it was worth celebrating. Not all were happy that Heorot had been built. Out on the moors and in the forest, there stalked a creature that brooded and seethed with anger and jealousy with the creation of this great hall. It was not happy. It had a black heart and envious eyes, and one night it took upon itself to spoil the party. While the Danes celebrated, they cheered and danced and sang in raucous enjoyment. The creature came to Heorot. It burst through the door, picked up one warrior, tore him to shreds, and disappeared before anybody knew what really had happened. Hygelic's men looked at each other. One dead Dane wasn't a problem to them, but they were intrigued, and the messenger continued. This happened again and again. No one really saw the creature that came. They named this creature Grendel, the Night Stalker, the Wolf Shadow. No man had claimed to see the whole thing. They spoke only of a talon or a claw or tooth or eye. But each time it came, it brought nightmare upon Heorot and left a trail of bodies in its wake. Some of Hrothgar's finest warriors were now dead and had been sent to the afterlife. And thus King Hrothgar, in his despair, had sent messengers far and wide in the middle of the coldest winter to see if they could find anyone who could rid the hall of this terrible creature. King Hygelac looked the messenger up and down. This is indeed a sad, sad story, he stifled a smile. He was not worried that Hrothgar and his men were being slain by this terrible creature. That made next year's raids even easier. Denmark would be an easy target. Hrothgar and his warriors were normally fearsome adversaries, but if half of them had been killed by some terrible creature, it was to Hygelac's advantage, and he knew that his warriors felt exactly the same. In fact, at times, there had been cheering as the messenger had given his story. But Beowulf, Hygelac's nephew, his sister's son, did not cheer. He stood up. My lord, I know there is no other warrior here who feels the need to go to Denmark to fight this creature for King Hrothgar, our enemy, but in very truth, I must go, as soon as I can. Hygelac turned to look at his nephew. He was disappointed, but he knew that this was probably the case. Beowulf, why say you such a thing? Why do you feel you must do this? Every man in the hall knew Beowulf's story. Every man in the hall knew that when Beowulf had been but a babe in arms, he had been taken to Denmark by his mother and father. Every man in the hall knew that Beowulf's father had slain a man in a fight that had got dangerous. Knives had been drawn. It had been a fair fight, but at the end, the other man was dead. Beowulf's father had paid Danegeld, the fine for killing the man. The family of the dead man was not happy. They wanted vengeance. They wanted vengeance on Beowulf's father and upon his family. So, fearing for his wife and his son, he took them across the sea, and they were given shelter in the court of the Danish king Hrothgar. Beowulf had grown up in the court of the king of the Danes, until he was maybe 10 or 11 summers old. And then he had returned to Geatland, to his homeland. But he owed his life to King Hrothgar, and now he knew he was obliged to return and pay back this debt. Hygelac looked at Beowulf. Surely you will not take ship in this weather, in these rough seas and the blizzards and storms of wintertime? No, my lord, I will not. But I will take my shoulder to shoulder men, my shield wall brothers, in the spring, where the days grow longer and the seas are calmer. Beowulf's brethren, The warriors he fought with in raid and battle looked at each other. An adventure of great promise. "Are you sure, Beowulf?" one called Wulfstan asked. "Do we really want to go to the aid of King Hrothgar?" "I have no choice, Wulfstan. I would hope my brothers in arms would join me. I owe this king a great debt. My life and the life of my mother. I must repay it." And it was agreed that when spring came, Beowulf would take ship and go into Denmark. The next few weeks and months, he and his warriors readied themselves. They repaired armour, sharpened swords and axes, made new shields, cleaned and caulked their ship, and when the sun was in the sky longer than the moon, and when the sea had calmed, Beowulf and 12 of his closest men took to their ship and journeyed across the sea to Denmark. The crossing was calm. It took but a few days of stout rowing for Beowulf and his followers to soon have the coast of Denmark in sight. From the coast, King Hrothgar's coast wardens spotted the ship. A coast warden was a warrior who was too old to go on a raid, but he was still experienced and wily and cunning enough to recognise an enemy when they came. Hrothgar had many, and so his men patrolled the cliff tops and the coastline and kept an eye out for raiders. They watched as the ship rowed up the fjord. Several rowed away to Heorot to take the news, while Beowulf and his men rowed carefully and slowly towards the beach. They were not arrayed for war. They wore neither helmet nor mail sark, and their shields were not hung on the side of their ship to show that they were ready for a fight. They beached their ship hard onto the shingle. Beowulf waded ashore and spoke to the coast warden. "We're here to rid your king of an adversary that he and his warriors cannot. I am here to repay a debt to King Hrothgar. We must make our way to Heorot. We do not come to fight. We wear no armour, nor carry our shields and helms, and weapons are left within the ship." The coast warden looked at the 12 other men. None of them were ready for a fight. "I'm sure our king will appreciate you coming to his aid," he said sadly, "but I'm sure it will be to no avail. You must take the coast road, up the cliff and across the moors. You will not be able to miss Heorot. It is a fine building in the distance. The walk will take you some time." And with that he turned his horse and rode away. Beowulf bade his men get their equipment, their weapons and armour from the ship, and carry their shields and spears upon their shoulder. They made their way up the cliff top and across the moors to Heorot, where Grendel waited and writhed with anger and spite.
It looks just like an old box filled up with junk and old socks, but never judge a thing by how it seems. On the outside it's a casket, but if you simply ask it, it opens up into a world of dreams. Heroes, heroines, witches, wizards, fools and all the rest. Who can tell what's hidden away inside the story chest? Tales and yarns and fables, ballads, songs and jests. So join us as we rummage in the magic story